Well, good day, my friends. We have entered Texas. Daze with Jordan the Lion. It begins now. Well, my friends, today we are in O'Donnell, Texas, the childhood home of Dan Blocker. Many of you knew him as lovable HOSS Cartwright. So Dan Blocker's story actually starts out in DeKalb, Texas, which we have been to before. That is where Rick Nelson's plane crashed. He was born there, his father had a farm there, and around the age of 5 years old, Dan's only sister, who was 11 years old at the time, ended up passing away. His father was having some hardships on the farm and ended up selling the farm and moved Dan and his mother to right here in O'Donnell, Texas, where our story really begins. It's a very, very small town. It was a pretty small town even then, but every small town needs a grocery store, and the Blockers ran that store. His father ended up scraping together some money and got a loan here in town and opened the Blocker grocery store, which unfortunately now is closed, but if you would have came here in its heyday, you would have seen a young Dan Blocker carrying feed bags and helping people with their groceries. This was certainly a family-run store, so his parents were both here all the time. He was here, and even though he was a big boy when he was born, he was 14 pounds, the biggest kid in the history of his county. He would end up being 6'4" and 300 pounds. A lot of his body was big muscle, and he was that pretty much every job he would end up having other than being an actor would incorporate using that muscle. So people knew that he was big and strong, but he was also very, very smart. So while his father owned this store, he would befriend all the businesses that he did business with and would tell him about how smart his son was, hoping to get Dan a better life and a better job than taking over this grocery store someday. Dan was a really, really good student, but he was also really, really strong too. And apparently every year on the 4th of July, this town would set up a boxing wrestling ring, and they would have boxing matches and a wrestling tournament. And one year Dan entered when he was in 8th grade, ended up throughout the day beating 3 grown men to win the tournament. And I read that that happened right here in a park across from the grocery store, so I'm guessing it probably happened right over here. Now that same 4th of July celebration they would have every year, eventually after Dan's passing, the year after his passing, his abrupt, untimely death in 1972, Dan's mother came out for the celebration, but in 1973, they ended up honoring Dan Blocker, Bobby Dan Blocker, here in his childhood hometown of O'Donnell with a life-size bust that will live on, and anybody that can make it to O'Donnell to see it, he will always be remembered here. It says, thanks to film HOSS Cartwright will live, but all too seldom does the world get to keep a Dan Blocker. Dedicated July 4th, 1973. Right here in the park, right beside the bust, which is right over here, and the grocery store, which is right here, they have the history of the town and how they always have a big picnic on 4th of July, celebrate the arrival of the first Santa Fe train. And it says that a graduate of this town was actor Dan Blocker, HOSS Cartwright. For the time that he was growing up here, this was much more than just a grocery store. This was pretty much their life. And like I said, his father wanted a better life for him, so he eventually sent him to a military academy But while they lived here, from the time that they moved here and they were getting their start, starting up the store and everything, they would actually live around back in the back of the store. So let's go take a look at that. I don't know when the last time something has been here, but his dad eventually ended up closing the store in 1960. Well, he didn't close it, he ended up selling it to, that's crazy, that's got like a hinge, almost like you could pull the door open. But his father sold it to one of his wife's nephews, and he was gonna move out to Hollywood because Bonanza had been picked up for a longer run, and Dan insisted. He said, I want to retire you and Mom. I want you to come live out here. So while he was in the process of doing the transition with the nephew, he ended up passing away. Never got to live those days in Hollywood, but Dan's mom would end up moving out there, and then eventually after Dan passed, she moved back to DeKalb. But when they first were living here, before they could afford a house, they would live back here. Now he was smart, like I said. People knew that. They knew he was strong and everything. And like I said, he went to the military academy, played football, and then came back here and played football. Then went to college and also played football. And within his first year of college, he decided that he wanted to become a teacher. So he transferred to another school that was a teaching prep school. And while he was there, he would end up getting a job for the rodeo as a part-time job. That's where he would learn how to work with horses and everything. And he said they basically had him do anything that involved being big and strong. And he also got involved in the theater department while he was there. One day while he was helping to work on sets, he saw a girl named Alfia, and he pretty much fell in love right away. He said she didn't. He said it took quite a bit of work on his part, but eventually she fell in love with him, and they were eventually married after he got out of the military. Yes, he successfully graduated with a master's degree and became a teacher, and then he got drafted. So he went and served in the Korean War, was an infantry sergeant, and actually was awarded a Purple Heart for being wounded in battle. Then when he came back, he and Alfia ended up getting married, I believe here in this town. And then he went off and became a teacher. And for a couple of years, he was an English and drama teacher. And then decided he wanted to further his education by going out to Los Angeles to UCLA, and was working on his PhD there. And one day he was using a payphone, and a man saw him, and he happened to be wearing all of his cowboy duds. And the guy said, "Are you an actor?" And he said, "Yeah, of course I'm an actor," because he had done acting in college. And the guy said, "What show are you on right now?" And he said, "I'm just kidding, I'm not an actor." And the guy said, "Well, you look the part, and you're a big guy. Hollywood can always use somebody like you." So the guy became his agent and started sending him out, and he became pretty much booked around the clock. He was on every cowboy show. Starting in 1957, he was in about 5 shows. He got his very first start on a Three Stooges project, and then was in several things that year. And then the next year, there were just tons of cowboy shows on TV. So he was in like 16 different shows with reoccurring parts, sometimes coming back between 2 and 5 times. And then eventually auditioned for Bonanza. And Bonanza, of course, as we know, was groundbreaking because it was in color and it was an all-star cast. I mean, all those guys, I remember reading about how when the show started, they knew it was going to be big, or they were hoping it was going to be big. So they pretty much right away decided that every week the introduction of the show had to change who they showed first, because they didn't want any of the guys to get their feelings hurt if they weren't considered the star of the show. And that was not Dan Blocker at all. He actually could care less about stardom, fame. I think he loved to act. And he pretty much was HOSS Cartwright, except much smarter, but he was that lovable guy that would stand up for people, that would intervene in a fight. When when he was in college, one of his jobs was a bouncer, so he had a very fascinating life. When I lived in Los Angeles, I used to have to drive down Pacific Coast Highway almost every night, and I would always see Dan Blocker Beach, and one day I looked it up because I was curious about it, and it was actually, you know, he had an untimely death that I'll talk about when we get out to the cemetery where he's buried, but Michael Landon and Lauren Green, who were the co-stars of Bonanza with him, they were such great friends of his that they all had a steakhouse business together. They had the Bonanza Steakhouse, but they were so heartbroken when he passed that they bought that section of the beach and named it after him. So we're gonna see if we can't find where his childhood home was here after they moved out of the grocery, and then we'll head to DeKalb. They do have a museum here in town, but it's not open for some reason today. Bust is right here, and the museum is literally right there. It's called the Heritage Museum. They have a bit of a Dan Blocker display in there, but unfortunately, I mean, I think this town only has 700 population, so probably don't have anybody to work there all the time. Dan and Dolphia had 2 sons when they moved out to Los Angeles, and then one of them actually is an actor, and then they had twin daughters also. And I read that Dan got to a point where, you know, he just didn't want to be recognized for a celebrity at all, so a lot of times when the show wasn't filming any longer, the times of the year that it wasn't filming, he was actually living in Switzerland with the family. It says it's closed on Monday, but I'm here on a Thursday, so we'll see if we can't find his childhood home before we leave or on our way out. From the photos I've seen, that looks like that is it. That is the house that they moved into after they were living in the grocery store. His parents owned that grocery store for 26 years. And I believe Dolphia and Dan got married here in front of 20 of their friends. Dan's entire family is buried with him in DeKalb, so let's head there. It's quite a drive. Texas is a big state. We've been driving for hours. We're finally now passing through Dallas. All right, it has taken us all day to drive out here. I don't know how long that was, 7-8 hours, something like that, I feel like. We got here just in the nick of time to see Dan. Hey, as we come pretty close to the back, he's back here. Here's the family plot right here. You can see it says Blocker family. And there he is. Bobby Dan Davis Blocker. His was a very unexpected death. Like I said, he was on the most popular show on TV. Bonanza was in its 14th season, and he went in for a gallbladder surgery. They didn't think it would be any big deal, and he came out of the surgery, went home, and then was complaining of abdominal pain. So they called a paramedic. When they got there, he was grabbing at his chest, so they thought that he was having a heart attack, and took him to the hospital. And when we got there, doctors told his wife that he was going to be okay, and then an hour later they came and told her that he was gone, that he had passed away at the age of 43. Really sad. They had to deal with that on Bonanza, and the ratings after that, people were so sad that the ratings just continued to go down. So his death kind of signified the end of the show. But I mentioned he had an older sister who passed away when they lived out here. This is her, Ora, Virginia. And then of course there's Dan. On his birth certificate they actually wrote Don. Somebody's left a Bonanza disc up here. Then here's his mother, Mary Arizona Blocker, and his father, Ora Shack Blocker. Shack ran the grocery store. And sadly, 1960, like I said, Dan wanted him to move out there and he wanted to take care of him for the rest of their life, and Shack ended up passing away. Rest in peace, Dan Blocker, also known as beloved Hoss Cartwright. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.